even Nick Saban talks about this, right? They were a national championship winning team. Not one place in the facility was there anything about winning a national championship, right? He says everything was about process.
Thank you so much for clicking on the video. This is a great interview with Harsh Mankad. There's a little bit of a background noise of a dog barking. Super annoying dog. So embrace that. It lasts about 4 minutes. And then also Harsh's mic is a little bit like squeaky in the beginning. It all corrects itself. So embrace it, but enjoy the interview. Today, we get to interview Harsh Mankad, who is a former Davis Cup player for Team India, was the #1 singles player for the University of Minnesota, and was also a Hall of Famer for the University of Minnesota, and currently owns and operates Tennis City, located in the Twin Cities area. Thank you so much for coming on, Harsh.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you and to talk tennis.
Harsh, I want to start out with this. I mean, you've seen tennis from a lot of different angles. What is your take on the current state of the beautiful game of tennis? And that's a very broad question, but answer it however you'd like.
Yeah, from our perspective, our program over the last 5 years has significantly grown tennis in Minnesota. So through working with communities and offering programs through city parks and rec, we've made tennis accessible. So traditionally, the barriers for tennis were, you needed a club membership, or there's always been that issue with access, right? It's considered more of an elite sport. And we've broken down those barriers in Minnesota. Today, you can join a Tennis City program through city parks and rec. And so through that, we've really grown the sport. And now we have more than 500 children who are being introduced to tennis. The numbers are growing. So we've achieved participation growth through a focus on taking tennis to the masses, teaching it well, and delivering quality. And the children who enjoy the game are continuing to play, and then providing them with a development path. So I think when you do those things well, the sport grows, right? And it's about putting that effort into place and having that leadership and having that vision. And then the sport grows. So the sport, obviously there's so many other sports that are growing. There's pickle and paddle, and they're all growing, and that's great. But in tennis, we've got to do the work of promoting and growing the game. And that's what's going to grow it. And so from my perspective, we're making the effort. But from a broader perspective, we all understand that a lot needs to be done to grow tennis, to promote tennis. And there are some challenges, that need solutions. And the solutions have to come now, not a year from now. And that's the work that we need to do. And I think that's important work, because otherwise, we run the risk of being taken over by other sports. We're already losing courts and so forth. So that's kind of, some of my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's beautifully said, Harsh. I mean, I think when you talk about, when it comes to the enjoyment and providing access, tennis is a sport that traditionally has been, quote unquote, a country club sport, which we're all trying to make it more accessible. What are some initiatives that you have taken to make it accessible to folks who may not have the resources that, your stereotypical USTA tournament player family may have?
We've partnered with schools and cities, starting with Centennial Schools in the Twin Cities. That was our first partnership. And they had a need for somebody to run their tennis programs for their school, through community education. And I thought that was a great opportunity to provide tennis at the beginner level, to build the grassroots, because I look at it as a development path, right? And having strong beginner tennis, having a lot of children involved in tennis is beneficial for our program, but also benefits the sport. So it started with that partnership, and going out there and delivering programs, building a team. And it turns out there are other cities who have a similar need, right? New Brighton, Blaine, Bloomington, Edina, New Hope. These are all the cities that now we are working with over the last 5 years, because we've done a good job, because we've gone there, we've delivered programs, we've grown participation, the parents have seen the quality. And so all of that effort, creates momentum. And that's how the sport is growing. And I think in Minnesota now, we have a very unique model. The level of experience and expertise that we have at the grassroots level, I don't think exists anywhere in the country, and what we are doing. And so we have a very strong foundation. The children are able to come to their neighborhood park or their school and learn from experienced and trained instructors, right? And then be on a development path. So as they go through beginner tennis, then we're guiding them through the higher levels of the game. We have a number of children now who started beginner tennis with us, are now at the intermediate level. They have aspirations to play a higher level. That's how I see the sport growing, right? You have to do the work at the grassroots, at the fundamentals, drive that participation. And from there, you're going to get that funnel and kids playing. So those are all the initiatives, with a strong focus on growing the sport, making it accessible. In our programs, we even provide equipment. The children don't, they're trying tennis, and getting equipment or a racket is a barrier. Well, that's provided for you, right? So we're trying to remove all of those issues that have come traditionally into, people maybe having a tougher time trying to pick up tennis.
And Harsh, if you can kind of explain, and what you're explaining right now is your business, is what you're doing, Tennis City. So is a community, city council reaching out to you, or a school district reaching out to you and saying, hey, we don't have a tennis program in place, can you do it? And then you say, yes, we have this business process, we'll come in, this is our ask, blah 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 blah. This is the program, the setup, and then they kind of just let you run with it? Or how exactly does that kind of work out?
One has to be proactive. So we are reaching out
Okay.
proactively. And for example, in New Brighton, I was at the courts and I connected with the city asking if I could use the court for private lessons. And in that communication, it turned out they were looking for someone to run their programs. So it's just conversations like that, right? Being proactive, reaching out, letting people know what you're doing. Those initial partnerships were built that way. In Centennial, I was introduced by another coach, right? And then some of the other partnerships, it's word of mouth, right? When we started working with some cities, they're all meeting each other, right? The directors of the youth sports or city programming, they know each other, they have their network, so the word spreads. And when they find out that others are looking for it, we gain referrals. So it's sort of a lot of word of mouth and proactive efforts to reach out and to build those partnerships and to promote the game. Oftentimes we need to promote the game with the cities and schools and talk about tennis and how it's a lifelong sport and the benefits of the sport. So I think that, we being in the industry have a responsibility to grow the game and to promote it and to be actively engaged with the community and all of the stakeholders to keep growing tennis.
Yeah, I would completely agree, Harsh. And, on that lifelong love concept, how did you get involved with the game of tennis as a young boy? How did tennis come into your life?
Yeah, I was fortunate. So my mother was India's number one tennis player. In fact, one of the top tennis players in the history of tennis in India. So, and then my grandfather, my mother's father, was a former Davis Cup player and had played at a high level. My father played cricket for India. My grandfather, my father's dad, played cricket for India. So I was born in a family, where there were high level athletes. My brother was playing tennis. So I had a lot of inspiration, an opportunity, and I was introduced to the game at a young age. And also through my family, I received great coaching and opportunities to play. So that's how I got introduced to the game and fell in love with it, and just liked how, active the game is, right? I also loved cricket. And there was a time in my life I had to make that decision on whether cricket or tennis. But what I really enjoyed about tennis is when you're in the sport, whether if you're playing for 2 hours, you're completely engaged and active for those 2 hours. And that's kind of, was a big draw to me, that I really liked that.
And you of course downplayed it because it is your family, but um I I of course did a little bit of research before this, and your family is very, very well known in the cricket world in India. And one thing that I found fascinating, and maybe you can explain this a little bit better, but your last name, Mankad, your grand your granddad, he essentially is the reason why there's a terminology in cricket called man kidding. I think that's
That's
how
right.
you pronounce it, where they're like going backward. Can you explain like that, and how the nickname, I guess, or why, or what the nickname means of man kidding in cricket?
Yeah, so it's basically, he was playing in an international match, I believe, against Australia. And it's how you steal a base in baseball,
Yeah.
right? The runner kind of takes a lead and you can run them out.
Mhm.
Very similarly in cricket, the runner was taking a lead before he was delivering the ball, or in baseball it would be pitching. And he had warned the runner. So he had warned him that, hey, you're doing this. If you continue to do this, I will get you out, right? Run out. And that's essentially what happened. And it was, I think, the first time that was done, well within the rules. But it just was, practice that wasn't done. So it just speaks to the competitor that he was, right? And the fact that, yeah. So then the terminology came in. That way of getting somebody out started to be called as being, mancaded. So but now it's, recently it was done by a few other cricketers and was in the news. But I think well within the rules of the game, and that's how you compete. And he sort of set the tone on the professional that he was, and he took the sport seriously and was looking for, the advantage that he could gain to be successful.
Did you play both cricket and tennis then when you were a kid?
A lot, yeah. I was, Mumbai, where I grew up, is a hotbed for cricket. A lot of the top cricketers in India come from Mumbai. So it has a very deep culture and history of cricketing excellence. And of course, being from a cricketing family, I was exposed to that. My dad used to play with me a lot. He taught me the fundamentals. So just being in that environment and culture, I had a love for the game. I had, a skill set too from a very young age. I could bat, I could bowl. It came naturally to me. So there was clearly a path for me to play cricket. But my parents encouraged me to take up tennis, and I enjoyed the sport. And it turned out that, that would be the sport that I pursue and became a career.
What was growing up in playing tennis in India like? I'm assuming that maybe it was in its more of its infancy, or maybe the beginning stages. I feel like India hasn't really developed into kind of that one of those powerhouses yet. I know there's a couple players on the pro tour. Probably the most notable is Rohan Bopana. Singles wise, Summit Nagel, both those guys are top players, but there hasn't been like a top or consistently top 5 guys or top 10 guys. So kind of curious what your thought was on tennis growing up in India.
Yeah, in fact, India has a rich tradition for tennis. If you go back to, the 70s, you had Ramnathan Krishnan, who made semis at Wimbledon.
Okay.
Ramesh Krishnan, his son, also played at a high level, top 30 level tennis. And so in that generation, two generations before me, There were players who were playing and competing at the highest level. In fact, there was a circuit in India. People like Ili Nastase and so forth used to come to India to play tournaments. Unfortunately, I think that system sort of died out, and I think also the change in the game, right? Traditionally, the game was played on grass courts. Indian tennis emphasized a lot of finesse and sort of using your mind, and more field tennis. And I think the game of tennis changed with going to hard courts and becoming more of a power game, right? When I was growing up, we were looking at Becker and then Agassi and Sampras, and it was predominantly moving to hard court tennis, different technique, right? The semi-Western grips, more power tennis, more emphasis on fitness and the power game. And Indian tennis fundamentally was more around feel and those aspects of the game, which sort of died out, right, at the highest level. So I think that has impacted some. And then unfortunately, my experience is that India did not have a good player development system. In fact, a player development department doesn't even exist even today within the federation. So as the USTA has player development and so much resources going into talent identification and then developing and nurturing talent to the highest level, that doesn't exist in India. And that's very unfortunate that it hasn't been developed, just the way the sport has been governed. And so I think that's really hurt the game. There's no lack of talent in Indian junior tennis that I saw. We reached the under 14. Our team reached the World Youth Cup. So we were top 3 in Asia, and we went to Japan. That was my first international tournament, and we competed against the best 16 junior teams in the world. The juniors that I grew up with, the juniors that my brother, I have a brother 7 years older to me. So I saw his generation from whom Leander Paes came out, right? He was the world number 1 junior. Yeah. But I can tell you that there were at least in the top 10, the difference between Leander, who was the world number 1 junior, won junior Wimbledon, and the other 9 players, including my brother, was not much. On any given day, those 9 players could have beaten Leander. That's how strong that cohort was. Unfortunately, there was no pathway for them. Leander made it because he was such an exceptional talent, the best in the world, that he was able to pursue professional tennis. They were able to develop sponsorship for him to play. But for the other 9, there was no pathway, there was no sponsorship, there was no opportunity. And so many of them came to the US to college tennis. And it's the same in my generation. As a number 1 junior in the country, I had no sponsorship. I had no support to play, right? So college tennis was the only option. There was no other option after junior tennis. And that's the unfortunate reality. For me, it was great. I got the opportunity to come to the US, play college tennis, have a great experience, and then pursue professional tennis. But it was a struggle professionally because everything was, you're on your own. There's no support system, right? And you can imagine how much goes into traveling and putting together a team and so forth. And that's just not viable for a lot of Indian players. And so I think that at a certain point that hurts you. And then when you're competing against the top 200 players, the top 100 players who have a team, who have the expertise, who have the resources and opportunities, it becomes it becomes an uphill battle. And that's the reason that I think you don't see Indian players in the top 100. There just is a lack of opportunity.
Yeah, and that's almost harsh. It's almost frustrating to hear, because the talent is there, it sounds like. If let's say you were the governing body, just you, of tennis in India or in other nations where, you've got high-level players, how would you change it? Because the reality is that, that pipeline is critical.
Yeah, I think there are great examples of how it's done well across the world, right? Whether it's the US and the system that's here. Now, granted, it's not a perfect system here. There's things that the US does really well, and there's always things that can be done better. And the
We're
same
good hitters. We're not always the best players.
Right, but there's still, 20 women in the top 100.
Yeah.
More than
Yes. Yep.
20. They're close to 20 men in the top 100, right? There's an ecosystem here, right? Same with Australia, same with the UK, right? So there's ample opportunity to study and to learn from systems that are developing players, or from regions where players are coming through. And I think the problem with India has been, and I've been vocal about this over the last decade or so, is there is an idea that we'll run tournaments and that'll develop players. And I think that's flawed. There's so much resources that go into tournaments. And I think tournaments are great. It's important to have tournaments. It creates an opportunity for the players to perform. It creates a pathway. But you have to invest in player development. You need to have programs that train your players, right? You got to provide them with high level training and the resources and the expertise and the guidance and preparation to perform. So that's one thing that I would focus a lot on. If I had the opportunity to run Indian tennis, I would be focusing on player development right from the start, and trying to create initiatives, trying to drive investment into developing players and continuing the investment into tournaments and so forth. So then that sort of creates a more solid system. Because from what I saw, I recently worked with the top Indian women's player, and I was there at tournaments. And so I got to see the top 20, 25 Indian women's players playing. And you can see that so much more needs to be done in terms of their training and preparation, all aspects, how they're playing, how they're developing points, their fitness, their mental toughness, how they're competing. All of that needs to be enhanced. And those are ways that the association can facilitate that, and create those opportunities for the players to enhance their training. And I believe that's what creates high level performance, right? If you look at the American champions, Coco Gauff winning a US Open, there's been solid work that's gone into preparing her from a young age and providing the training and development that she needs to be able to ultimately perform at the US Open stage.
And you referenced, coaching one of the top Indian, players, Sahaja Yamalapalli,
Right.
coaching her, and you've been doing that for the last few months, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure if you're doing it currently, but and I do have to give you a shout out, because this is I found a post on LinkedIn maybe like 4 or 5 months back, and it was you posted something, so followed along. I was like, this is super intriguing. I've never seen someone post on LinkedIn about tennis, the tennis mindset, the tennis business, it just weaving in tennis into normal life. And then you started coaching this top female player out of India, and it fascinated me even more that you were essentially walking the walk in terms of, hey, what would I do in terms of player development? You're doing that. You're going in working with a player who is growing, trying to get into the top, I think, 300 for the women. So how do you get connected with with someone like that?
Yeah, so the connection was created through a mutual contact, um, in California, where I had trained. In fact, I stayed with him, and his name is R. Jayakrishnan. He's a professor at UC Irvine, but a big follower of Indian tennis. And when I was playing, was supporting me a lot, and so he was following Sahaja, and Sahaja was going through similar challenges. She didn't have stability with her coaching, traveling alone on the tour, trying to navigate everything, trying to get to higher levels. And Jay felt like I could help Sahaja. So that's where the connection was made. And when I connected with Sahaja and started to learn about her experience, so many things of what I had gone through were very similar, from 20 years ago. She had the same challenges: lack of support, lack of coaching, sponsorships, and so forth. And so we were able to connect. She came up to Minnesota and trained here. I was excited about that a professional player is coming to Minnesota to train. We were able to put together a very solid program for her. She did her fitness at the University of Minnesota under Cal Dietz, who's the head strength and conditioning coach there. And the University of Minnesota gym is one of the technologically most advanced gyms in the country. So Cal Dietz is at the highest level in fitness. So, we were able to provide her with a level of experience and expertise that's of, a very high caliber. And right away, her results improved. She made the quarters at Bakersfield, lost to Amelia Honor, who's playing at UCSB, top 10 college player, very close match. Amelia went on to win the tournament. A couple of weeks later, Sahaja qualified at the WTA in Tampico in Mexico. And then in India, during that swing, consistently quarters, semis. So it was a really good setup. Unfortunately, we couldn't continue because, again, she doesn't have the sponsorship. She doesn't have the financial backing to put together a solid team. Imagine this, the number one player of the country doesn't have the financial support to have, a quality coaching team for a sustained period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
wild.
and so how are you going to produce a top 100 player? That's the number one player. I mean, the rest, I don't know what's. So it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is, and that's the sport business right now in India. Most of the money in terms of sponsorships and marketing goes to cricket, because every cricket match draws hundreds of millions of viewers, and that's the kind of audience that you need to be able to gain sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when they look at a tennis player who's 300 in the world and playing challengers and ITF events, they're just not seeing that same viewership. Right. Once you get to the top 100 and you're playing main draw and grand slams, that's when the sponsorships are coming. The problem is you need a lot to get to that level.
Right.
So it's sort of a vicious cycle, and it's a very challenging situation. So now Sahaja is, back to, she's doing what she can. She's traveling, and and so that's how it is.
What do you have to see in the player to commit to that person? Because you traveled around with her. I believe you went to Dubai, in Asia as well. What does it take in that specific individual, that specific player, where you are willing to invest your time in travel to go do that?
I'm willing to help players who. So with Sahaja, what I realized early is she had great commitment and dedication, and that, she gives her whole life to this, right? And so that to me means a lot when you see a player who's so committed and passionate about what they're doing. And then, of course, she has strengths in her game. She's a great ball striker. She can play attacking tennis. So those are areas that I noticed, and where I can help her, right? Because helping her to develop clarity on how she needs to play, right? And then enhancing the game. So all of those areas, I could see clearly that I could add value, and also helping the player in kind of thinking through their career, right? Because a lot of players are also just playing week to week to week. They're chasing points and rankings. And so those are all the areas that I saw lacking, and clearly where I could add value. And those were reasons why, I decided to help her. And also, this is a critical time. She's 24. She has now this window of time to make this jump, and that's the thing with tennis, right? You have a limited window.
Yep.
And so if I can help a player go from 300 to making the top 100, that completely changes their career. They're on a completely different trajectory. Right now, they're getting into Grand Slam main draws. They're getting into the top tournaments. So that's kind of exciting. And based on the experience that I have, and the last 35 years that I've spent in the sport, I believe I can help players make that transition. So it was really fun to connect with her and go to Dubai and go back to the professional tournaments. I really missed it, and enjoyed being back at that level.
One Some may call him the bad boy of tennis, Nick Kyrgios. But Kyrgios is notorious and known for having a very unique schedule that works for him with his tour schedule. He doesn't play a lot of the European tournaments. He does a lot of the stuff in the States, in Australia, and it's a much more shortened season. Granted, he's been hurt the last few years, but I want to kind of pick your brain. What do you think a professional player, where they're chasing points, they're trying to earn main draws, what's the ideal schedule for a professional player like Sahaja?
The way the tour is structured, where you take your best 16 or your best 19, and you can play n number of tournaments to get to best 19, right? It's not counting every performance. So what ends up happening is a lot of players, and this happened to me too when I was playing, you just get pushed into playing a lot of tournaments. If you lose first round, you drop it, you go again and play. So you're trying to get that 19. And in trying to get those 19 tournaments, you're playing 28, 30, 32 weeks. And oftentimes players don't even realize how many tournaments they're playing, right? One of the first things I did with Sahaja is I sat down and I mapped out an entire year, week to week. And we counted how many tournaments, how many training weeks, and what were the gaps. And so, a lot of times the players are playing too much. They keep competing. And you need somebody to step in and say, hey, you need to take a break. You need to train, right? You need to take these 4 weeks to step away, work on your game, develop, get some improvements physically, mentally, tennis wise, go back and play. So there isn't a one size fits all, but definitely I feel that, the approach is to carve out time during the year for training, for rest and recovery, and then for quality tournament play, not quantity, right? And that's kind of the method that I apply. And so for Saja in November, we took the whole month off. She was in Minnesota and she trained, right? And she recovered from an injury, gained physically, tennis wise. And then the next 3-4 weeks, starting with Dubai, you can see those performances, right? In Thailand, W75, she made the semis. That's a career best at a W75 tournament. So that work, I really believe in that work that we put in the training side, and I think that's important in terms of planning.
And you referenced the training, and our brains will always go, to the playing, the ball striking, the drilling, but the mental part of tennis is probably way more important. Well, it is probably equally important as the physical side. What kind of mental work do you do with someone like Sahaja?
Yeah, so I see it as a pie chart, right? And so sometimes people say, oh, it's all mental. It's not all mental. You got to have the game, right? So it's a pie chart, right? Everything it's important. Yes, the mental aspect is, a significant part of it. So is the physical. So is the tennis technique. So is your game strategy, right? Your competitive mindset. As far as mental training goes, we work with young kids right from beginner tennis on the mindset, right? And one of the things that we try to do is develop a fearless mindset. Because I think concepts like fear, we adults bring in, right? Children don't have fear. They want to play. We come in with our concepts, and then the way we talk and the way we communicate, we start getting them to think about, oh, big point, not big point, pressure point, big tournament. These are all adult concepts and they don't help performance. They just create fear and doubt. And so one of the things is being fearless, right? Helping players to develop that fearlessness, trust in their strokes, go out and hit your shots, right? Don't worry about the mistakes, right? Everybody makes errors, right? Even Federer, when he was playing at his best, used to make unforced errors, right? So so it's okay, but you got to go after your shots. That's how you're going to play at higher levels. And so I think with Sahaja, but also with our developing players, we work a lot on the mindset and then certain exercises that help them to develop those qualities, right? That we want to develop in for competition. Fearlessness being one, belief in yourself, clarity on how you need to play, and commitment to the process, right? So process approach, do the work, right? Do the work that you need to do. That's going to pay off. Everybody wants the result. Everybody wants to win. And even Nick Saban talks about this, right? They were a national championship winning team. Not one place in the facility was there anything about winning a national championship, right? He says everything was about process. What do you need to do on a daily basis, putting in the work, and then the
Harsh,
result comes.
that's beauty to my ears. As a Division III tennis coach and somebody who actually I worked for a sports psychology company as a marketing person, but was around psychologists, and that's the truth, though. I mean, it's in this game that we play called tennis. If you focus on the results, you're not going to be successful. You need to focus on the controllables.
Absolutely. And, I also follow the inner game of tennis. I was introduced to this through my coach when I was playing Happy Bala, who had an academy in New York. And he brought a lot of concepts around the spirituality of tennis and the mind game. And there were a lot of connections with the inner game. But Sean Brawley wrote an article, Winning the Inner Game. And he says, performance equals potential minus interference. And I think it's a beautiful, simple formula, right? Develop your potential, learn how to minimize the interference, and you're going to perform at your best, right? And so a lot of times it's that interference, right, David? And that interference is the result, right? Focusing so much on the result. I want to win, or this happened or that happened, and it's all just sort of impeding performance.
And so my question for you is like, obviously you've worked with, I mean, you're working with high level players. Um, how, when the result becomes a uh, big thing in their minds, how do you remind them of, hey, the result is sometimes outside of our control? Like I always tell our guys on our team, we can control our footwork, attitude, focus, and effort. But it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to believe it and live it out. I mean, how have you dealt with that in moments of adversity with your players that you've worked with, or how did you as a player?
Well, we have deep belief in the work that we put in. So, and they can feel it right away. They can feel the improvement. They can feel that they're on a different trajectory. And so that's the buy-in, right? When the player themselves see what they're part of and understand how clear, what the clarity that's there, right? And so that helps to get that buy-in. And then just reminding them, if the balance, there's always a balance, right? And if the balance goes too much the other way, just reminding them about the things that they need to do, right? And giving them that motivation and trust the process. It will come, right? And I believe deeply in that, right? So I don't have a doubt that the results will come. We just don't know when. Yeah,
Right.
but putting in the work, committing to it. And in my life, it's always happened. And there's certain things that didn't happen. And that's the sport. I see it more now as the sport gives you. You don't get. You put
Right.
in the work and then you receive. That's kind of my perspective, right? I put in a lot of work in my career. There are certain goals that I accomplished, that I received. There are certain things. I wanted to be a top 100 singles player. I didn't receive that. It didn't happen for me. But I know I did my very best, right? And so that's a good feeling too. I have no regrets. Right? There's nothing I feel like I could have done more or better, um, so that's also a good feeling. And then there's certain things that happen, and certain things and that's just sport, and that's just life. Not
Yeah.
everybody achieves everything, right? So I think it's reminding them of those things and shaping their perspective and helping them to really dedicate themselves to what they need to do.
Well, I think that's, I mean, first of all, beautifully said. Um, and I think that is one thing when we look at the next generation of tennis, and current college players as well. Granted, I coach a D3 team. Um, but whether it's D3, D1, whether you're at Georgia, whether you're at Concordia College, so many players in this day and age are focused on results. They're looking at the UTR of their player prior to the match or their WTN, whatever it may be. And the reality is that yes, those things matter, but also those looking at those things prior to a match are not going to necessarily help you. Um, I think that, when we look at the sport of tennis, tennis is a vehicle for life. And if we focus on those controllables and the things that you just mentioned, it helps create such a more positive experience for the player. That's certainly something that we're trying to preach in our program. And I mean, not gonna lie, I may have copyrighted it from Gustavus. But still, I mean, it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and the reality is that the UTR or any ranking or rating is based on past performance.
Right. Not the current. It's the
This is
past.
a new moment, right? This is a new opportunity. And just because you beat X and I beat Y doesn't mean that you're going to beat me or I'm going to be, anything can happen. And in fact, that's playing out week to week. If you follow the women's tour, any given week, anybody is beating anybody. Saja's beating a player who's top 200, next day losing to an unranked player. Amelia
Yeah.
Holland comes in as a college player, wins an ITF tournament as an unranked wildcard. Iela, this last weekend in Miami, got a wild card, beat 3 players in the top 20, right? And
Yeah.
in Mumbai, she lost second round, I think, because I saw that match. And, and she's been playing all the ITFs. So if you can get yourself in the right mindset and physically ready, and you can be on this continuous improvement cycle, anything's possible. And the story about Iela, we did a practice session with her in Dubai. And I remember coming out of that practice session and telling Sahaja, this is the best practice that you've had. And I was so impressed with Iela because before the practice session, for an hour and a half, she was in the gym, working out, getting herself ready. She came on the court. The intensity was phenomenal. How focused she was, the physical intensity with which she played that practice session was outstanding. And it was such a good practice for Sahaja. And that was just a regular day for Iela. At the tournament, she wasn't playing a match. That was just another day. But through that, and now this performance last week, for me, the lesson is if you can bring that level of dedication and commitment and intensity every day, right? You're going to succeed.
Yeah.
And so that's the message, bring that every day to what you do, and you'll succeed.
And I kind of want to piggyback off of what you kind of just said, and I think a lot of it is also finding a way in your brain to win too, just because so much of it is internal. One thing that I used to do in juniors was I would see the draw of who I was playing, see my match, and if it was someone who was better than me, or ranked higher, I should say, I would go and find by the party of association somehow a way for me to win. So if I beat this person and they beat that person, in my head I'm like, okay, I can beat them. But I would always find a link somehow where I would beat someone, they would beat someone who beat someone who beat someone who beat someone who beat them, you know? And there's always one way to connect it, and that in my brain was the way for me to win. If I win and this person beat this person, um, it for you in coaching, high level players or even, local players, what does is each person, each player a little bit different in how they, you know, find ways to win and you know, find the internal motivation to kind of get over the hump?
Yeah, you make a great point, and I think there's several thoughts. One is this idea of finding a way, right? Find a way, compete. Because oftentimes what happens is, and this happened in our intermediate group, right? Players playing, and maybe the serve is not working. And they get so fixated on that one thing that's not working, the whole game, effort, mindset, everything goes down, right?
Yep.
And
Yes.
and so learning to let it go. All right, the serve's not working. What else can you do? Get it in. Compete with your ground strokes. Come to the net. That's working. Do more of it. Find a way. Compete. You can win a match purely through effort. Even if you're not playing well, you can outwork the other player. You can outthink the other player. There's so many ways to win a match. And I think when you give players that idea that, hey, there's so many ways to compete, and your job is to play the next point as hard as you can and apply yourself physically and mentally. And when they practice that, and when they learn how to do that, we're building competitors, because that's ultimately the mindset that you need.
Yeah.
And so that's one. The other aspect that you mentioned is, yes, having that mindset before. Sometimes we just beat ourselves before we even go on the court, right? Because we've sort of given so much respect to the other player. But letting it go, understanding that's in the past, this is a new opportunity, and learning how to be in the moment, right? And competing. And that's how all these, upsets happen all the time. And then just one more point that came to my mind is just having those role models, right? And I think tying it back to our previous conversation on Indian tennis and US tennis, the one thing that the US has is there's so many players at the highest level of the game, right? And across all sports, there's world champions across all sports. So children growing up here have so many role models, right? If Sampras could do it, I could do it. Right? If Agassi can be number one, I can be number one, right? It's that mindset. And so it kind of helps to have that, right? In Indian tennis, in India, we have that in cricket. You're the best cricketers in the world. So people really believe they can do it in cricket. But when you don't see, right, anybody at that higher level, it's a little harder to even kind of think, okay, is this possible, right? So there's a lot of, on the mental side, many things going on, but I think those were some thoughts that came to my mind when you were talking about the mental game.
Well, I'll tell you this, Harsh. We've got practice tonight at 9 p.m. I'm going to steal that line of "There's so many ways to win a match," and I'll credit you when I tell it to our guys. But I'm going to tell that to our guys because that's what we're dealing with right now. You can win a tennis match in so many different ways.
Yeah, and there's always going to be problems, right? There's always going to be challenges. It's kind of like life. One tennis match is like life, right? And
yes,
you have to
tennis
solve
is
the
a vehicle
problem
for life. Yeah,
yeah, you have to problem solve and mentally apply yourself, right? Not just physically show up on the court and run and get the ball and hit the shots, but mentally apply yourself point by point by point and figure it out, right? What do you need to do, right? And think through it. The other day I was playing a practice match, and I don't play that often now, but with this one player in a lesson wanted to play some points, and I was missing some returns, and I just stayed calm through it. And it's atypical. I was just spinny serve. I was missing returns in the net, and just sort of let it stay with me. Didn't react too much, and then I just realized that I need to transfer my weight through the shot more. And as soon as I realized that, as soon as I started doing that, the return started clearing the net. So mentally applying yourself, right? I could have got frustrated and come up with n number of excuses. Returns aren't working, this is that. But just to stay in there and figure it out, make that adjustment, and try to get your performance to a higher level. That's what changes matches.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of mental hypnosis in tennis? Have you ever heard of that before?
No, of course I know hypnosis, but no, I haven't heard. Yeah,
And maybe
used to
I'm
on that.
just describing it wrong. So there's this sports psych doctor back in Red Wing, Minnesota, and he has since passed, but his name was Dr. David Asp, and he brought our high school team into this small little room in the hospital, like the mental hospital that he worked, and he went through like a visualization practice for us. And essentially it was like hypnosis. It was super super bizarre, but he would walk through a 15-minute exercise where he would, you would be laying on the ground, and you'd, in a very calm voice, you'd almost talk through um like a match, getting in the zone, getting in the right headspace, what's around you, all the feelings and emotions of a tennis match. And then he was like, "Hey, if anyone wants a recording of something like this, like reach out to me. I'll make a personalized recording of it." I was a junior at the time, and I was like, "This would be kind of cool. I think this might help my game." So I asked him to do that, and he did it. And I listened to that thing all the time, all the time.
Well,
And
that
yeah,
reminds me, Isaac, of like, so again, uh, I worked at a sports psychology company, and one of the tactics that we used for helping athletes regain focus was a 5 4 3 2 1, where it's five things you feel, four things that you see, or five things that you see, four things that you feel, three things that you touch, two things that you smell, and then one thing that you, whatever the fifth sense is. But like, I mean, yeah, it's a great focus reallocation.
yeah. I sorry, I wasn't trying to like hijack the the convo and talk about that experience, but um yeah, I was just curious if you've heard of like that sort of exercise before in your practice. But
Yeah, I think well, one of the things I kind of related to that. I think that these practices that center you, that bring you more into your body, a little bit less in the mind, because we sometimes have the tendency to overanalyze, but just going back into how you feel, right? And kind of being more centered, help you to find that balance. And I think it has a physiological impact too, right? In terms of just calming you down, slowing down the heart rate, right? And when you're more in that optimal zone, I think it helps with timing and precision. Because if your heart rate is too high, right, and you're overly excited or nervous, the hands are going to start shaking, right? Now when you're shaking, how are you going to control the tennis racket, and how are you going to have that feel and that precision? So a lot of these practices, including learning how to breathe, right, going into your breath, present focus, that's where yoga, meditation, all of those things just help you to calm down in those situations and find a sense of balance, and then allow your best tennis to come through. So, whatever works for you, but I think there's definitely a lot of value in these practices in terms of performance.
and one thing that I guess want to end with, um with our time with you, Harsh, is a little bit of a inside stat of the YouTube channel that we have. And of our viewership, India is in the top 5 in terms of where our geography is. So my question to you: where do you think our most viewers in terms of viewership come from around the world in terms of country? Obviously, the first would be um,
U.S.
United States. What do you think the other hotbeds for viewership around the world in terms of backyard tennis viewership?
Wow, that's interesting. So India is in your top 5.
Yep, India is number 4.
Wow. Wow. And I'm not surprised, because it's a lot of people interested in tennis, and particularly in development and journey and the career.
In
Uh,
to give context, it's 5%. 5% of our viewers, our
okay.
total views are from India.
That's a tough one, but I would imagine there's got to be a European country in there.
Yep, there is one European country, and it has popped off over the last 3 years because of one really, really good tennis player from there.
Oh, okay.
It's
a tough.
Italy.
Okay, Italy. All
Yep,
right.
and then a couple countries. One, David has one of his players from Japan.
Okay.
That's number 3. So there must be a pretty poppin' community.
Yeah, our top guy on our team is from Okinawa.
Okay. All right.
And then the last on that list was South Korea. But yeah,
So Asia,
and of
3
course, like
countries.
we're not actually bringing in viewers from these places. I'm sure it's just
Right.
videos, tennis videos popping up on their feeds, but they're watching it. But I do think it is indicative of where tennis is popular in the world right now, and where people are consuming, tennis media. But anyways, sorry for my rant. Thank you so much, Harsh, for coming on and talking with us and spending your time and doing this. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for the work you're doing to grow tennis. And a lot more needs to be done. I'd love to see tennis growing and more popular in the US. And so, yeah, thanks for your work, and it helps. Everything helps to grow the sport.
Absolutely. Hey, this won't be the last time that we chat.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
connect and follow Harsh on LinkedIn. Also, he has a YouTube channel. Check out his YouTube channel. I'll link those in the description below this YouTube video. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. We'll see you soon again.